Where does this work lead to? What would happen if we succeeded in prolonging our efforts to be, so that our consciousness became a more constant flame? If our consciousness became more consistent, then we would access two new functions called the higher emotional and higher intellectual centers. These are not ordinary functions, like the emotional, moving, or intellectual centers. They are aspects of the Master. In this tutorial, we will examine these two functions. We will draw from the gospel scene of Mary meeting Jesus in the garden to see how the Genesis temptation is reversed and paradise regained. And we will use this understanding to place our daily efforts in a larger context, our moment-to-moment efforts to resist haste, to resist the expression of negative emotions, to resist indulging in imagination, ultimately aim to connect with the Master.
In addition to those centers of which we have so far spoken, there are two other centers in man, the higher emotional and the higher thinking. These centers are in us. They are fully developed and are working all the time, but their work fails to reach our ordinary consciousness.
We advance in this work by keeping one eye on where we are and another on where we're headed. If we only kept an eye on where we are, then we'd lose touch with the bigger scale of this work and our efforts would fall out of context. If, on the other hand, we only focused on where we're headed, then we'd lose touch with the reality of our present condition and neglect those moment-to-moment efforts required to be. So where are we headed? What would happen if we actually succeeded to be? If our work were not just intermittent sparks of consciousness, but a constant flame, then we would access two new functions called higher emotional and higher intellectual centers. These two functions, known as higher centers, are aspects of consciousness. Like the lower centers, they receive and digest impressions. But unlike the lower centers, they're not part of the human vessel. In other words, in the microcosmos, they're not part of the creation, but part of the Creator. They are the God of this cosmos. They are the Master. As their names suggest, there is a relation between the emotional center, or the heart, and the higher emotional center, and there is a relation between the intellectual center, or the mind, and the higher intellectual center. However, this relation is subtle and is therefore better explained through myth and imagery. The difference between the higher centers and the mind and the heart is like the difference between a spark and a flame. A spark is very different from a flame, but it remotely resembles a flame. It has the potential of a flame. In the same way, the mind and the heart, working at their full capacities, remotely resemble or reflect the higher emotional and the higher intellectual centers. This is why Adam and Eve are the mirror images of God. When the mind and the heart work at their full capacities, they transcend into higher intellectual and higher emotional centers. They become the Master.
In higher centers, there is no division between intellectual and emotional. Higher emotional center is only called emotional. On higher levels, what is emotional is also intellectual, and what is intellectual is emotional.
In the tutorial on the mind and the heart, we saw that this reflective quality of Adam and Eve could not be taken for granted. Only when our desire to be becomes both emotional and intelligent do heart and mind approach the unity of Master. On the other hand, when mind and heart bite on the temptation of the moment, they cease reflecting God. This means that in a state of inner chaos, in a state of identification, our lower centers cannot connect to our higher centers. We lose touch with our higher perceptions. This places our moment-to-moment efforts to be in a larger context. The aim of resisting haste, of not expressing negativity, of not indulging in imagination, is to bring our mind and heart up to speed so that they connect with higher centers. Our aim is to connect with the Master. All the tools offered by this system aim at this connection. For example, in the previous tutorial, we experimented with redeeming the mind through naming. By naming the temptation of the moment, our mind prevented it from assuming the title I, and thereby reduced identification. Eve, the heart, might still bite on the temptation of the moment, but Adam, the mind, refuses it. This, we said, was the beginning of the journey towards the Master. This process is portrayed mythologically in the Gospel episode of Mary Magdalene meeting Jesus in the garden.
Jesus saith unto her, Mary. She turned herself, and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father.
Jesus is almost ascended to his Father. He will fully ascend by rejecting the offering of Eve, or Mary, and reversing the original fall. The esoteric meaning of Jesus redeeming mankind from the original sin is the mind and the heart redeeming themselves from the state of identification and restoring order in the microcosmos, paradise regained. Adam and Eve symbolize the negligent mind and heart that bite on the temptation of the moment. Jesus and Mary symbolize the alert mind and heart that resist it. Through myth and symbolism, these biblical episodes convey the art and science of connecting with higher centers.
In ordinary conditions, the difference between the speed of our usual emotions and the speed of the higher emotional center is so great that no connection can take place, and we fail to hear within us the voices which are speaking and calling to us from the higher emotional center. The higher thinking center is still further removed from us, still less accessible.
At any given moment, our microcosmos is in one of these three distinct stages. When we are identified, our minds and hearts have bitten on the temptation of the moment. They are at the level of Adam and Eve. When we catch the eye of the moment, our minds and hearts have resisted its temptation. They rise to the level of Jesus and Mary. And when our consciousness combusts into a durable flame, our minds and hearts transcend into higher centers. They rise to the level of God. In the language of esoteric Christianity, this work is a journey from Adam to Jesus to God. In the language of the Fourth Way, it is a journey from the many eyes to real I, from inner slavery to self-mastery. To be, in the full sense of the term, is to become masters of ourselves.